Let's talk about the Tekchic. This one is the dual pen but single port red wood burning machine. I want to show you how to set it up, how to use it, and then I'm going to tell you whether or not I would recommend this to pyros like you. Hey Pyro, I'm Jannie Lisonbee, your Pyro professor. Welcome to Burn Savvy. Right now we are looking at the Tekchic. This is the dual burner, but really it should be called a single burner because it only has one port, but it is a dual burner because it has the two pens, and it comes with a screwdriver, a couple of these stands, and a couple of little cleaners. It also comes with an assortment of nibs that you can use. So that is typically what comes in the kit. And I want to show you a little bit about how to set it up. So I'm going to pull this one off to the side because we only have one pen. So we have our one pen, and here is our port plug. You can see it's got those two little holes there. This little piece slides up and down pretty easily. What you're going to do is take this, and you want to line it up with that. So there's a tiny little ridge down here, and so that tells us that that is the bottom right there. So we're going to line that up and plug it in, and then just tighten it down. Okay, and that's set. Now we need to choose a nib. I want to put a piece of paper down because I feel like this is really huge. I love when you have a good selection of nibs. So these are the nibs. So these are the nib options, and it looks like it has a pretty good variety, but you'll see that some of these are a little bit redundant. So here are the ballpoints, and it does have, it looks like, all three sizes of ballpoints, but then you have two ballpoints that are about the same size and two small ones that are about the same size. They just have a different shape at the bottom, which, you know, some people really like a different angle, but to me, it doesn't make that big of a difference. And so for me, I feel like the redundant nibs are unfortunate. Up next, we have the spear point nibs, and you can see the two on the left are pretty different. You've got one that typically goes straight up and down. The other one you can lay flat, but those two are pretty identical. And then you have the shaders where it's very similar. You've got three that are pretty much the same. And then you have one off to the side that is a little bit different, just because this one will sit up and down vertically and the other three will sit flat. And really, these aren't even bent. And typically I like to have them bent because when they're sitting that flat, it's really hard to get it flat against the wood, especially when you have a pen as thick as the Tekchic. Then you have some unique shapes like these. These are going to give you a hard, sharp line, the flat one will, and the rounded one is going to give you a softer line, and it's going to take curves nicely because it has a curved edge. Then you have these with a similar shape, but the round one gets you a soft line, the flatter one gets you a sharp line, and then this one has a similar point to the spear point nibs. And then you have this one over here in the middle that's similar to these other shaders, but it covers a larger space because it is larger, same as the one next to it that also covers a larger space than the smaller spear. So even though they have similar shapes, those are still good. Now this set over here is also pretty identical. You can pretty much do the same thing with any one of these nibs. So to me, this one seems pretty redundant, even though they have a slightly different shape. So overall, I would say it has a decent selection of nibs, but it does have some redundancy. That said, I am going to pull out a writing nib, and I'm going to pull out a shading nib. We'll take those two nibs. We're going to take the rest of these and put them to the side. Right. With those out of the way, we're going to put the shading nib off to the side, and we are going to start with the writing nib and placing it in the burner. First, you want to make sure those screws are loose. And then take the prongs, insert them like so, and then tighten them down. I'm just going to use this Phillips head. And you want it to be snug, but not too tight. You don't want to overdo it. And we're going to set that off to the side, and we're ready to go. Now, while you're burning, you can just use one of these stands. You won't need both because both aren't plugged in. You don't have both pens plugged in. So we're just going to put one stand off to the side. And then these little sponges are actually designed to wipe off the carbon that builds up as you burn. Now, before I actually demonstrate it, I want to point out that it does have a nice long cord. I like that when I'm working on larger pieces. The cord plugging in the machine to the wall is also long, so you don't have to be married to the wall. You can plug it in and set it on a table a little bit further away from the wall, and I really appreciate that. The cord is not super flexible, but it is lightweight, and that's nice. Another thing I want to point out is these stands. They actually really bug me because they're so lightweight that the cord makes the stand move. And it doesn't hold the pen still. And so I feel like if I bump it at all, that pen can fall right off. I prefer to have a more solid stand for a pen this substantial. Speaking of the pen, this one has a fairly thick handle compared to some of the other burners. It's a little bit thick like the Burnmaster, but here you can see a regular pen is much thinner than the Tekchic pen. And for some people, they love that thicker handle. Personally, I like the thinner handle. I don't really care for the nibs that screw in. To me, that's a little bit more labor intensive, but setting up the machine was actually fairly simple. So that's pretty nice. I like that. Now let's get into the actual performance of the machine. So I got this all set up here. I'm using a practice piece of poplar wood. I love these. I actually recommend them to all of my students. They're on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description for you. And the first thing that I'm going to do is put the machine on its lowest setting and start testing it out. So you can see the digital screen there hopping down to a 42. So we're going to test it out there. And typically what I do is I write the number with the burner, and then I will burn a small swatch to show how hot it is. And typically burners at their lowest setting, they really don't burn much. So we're going to bump that up a notch and wait for this to heat up a little bit more. And it doesn't look like it changed. Looks like it's still at a 45 and we're still at a very low heat. So we're going to bump this up again. And we're noticing that the 45 still hasn't changed. So bump it up again. And again, the screen has not changed. It still says 45, which is a very low heat, clearly, since it hasn't made any marks on the wood. So we'll turn it up another notch. And there's 77 and a crazy jump to 395. Did you guys see that? Let me show you again. I turn it up to 77 and it switches to 395. That was a massive jump. So let's see how differently this burns. So at 395, I'm going to write that out with the burner. And then I am going to make a little swatch of the value that that shades at. And then I'm going to turn it up again to the next notch. Oh, now we jump to 509. Yeah, 541. Do I dare burn it? Should I wait for it to change again? I'm going to go ahead and do it. Woo! And it is blazing hot. That was a pretty quick jump from nothing to a lot. So I'm turning it up another notch. 641, give it a second. Yeah, 685, okay. And it is very red. That nib is looking very hot. Yep. And there's not much of a mid-range right there. I am going to keep going up. We're going up one more notch. 801. Oh, looks like it's holding. Okay, 802. We'll go ahead and burn that one. Ooh, and we are on fire. So that is extremely hot. That kind of heat is really good for things like bone and gourd, things that are a little bit hotter. So we're going to go ahead and crank that up to the highest heat because that's what I do, and watch it burn the entire time. So it's got a really high heat, which is really fun. Now, typically when I am testing the heat, I like to go from low to high and then back down from high to low. So I've come back down to this next notch, which last time it burned at 802. This time it looks like it's at 765 when I'm at that notch. So when I turn the knob again, this was at 685 before. It's now at 668. So we're going to burn that and see what that does. And that is still very hot, but we're not lighting a fire anymore. The next notch down. Okay, give it a second. Looks like it's done changing. So we'll burn at 531. And you can see that as I am burning these, they're kind of the same heat, 802 to 765, 685 to 668. I mean, but they're still pretty off. So let's look at 389 now compared to 395. And 389 actually looks darker than 395. And so I would say that this heat is not super consistent. We're going to come back down, and oh, hey, this notch that was at 45 on the way up is at 205 on the way down. And we are getting some color there. Okay, so that shows me that if you come back down, you might have better luck than going up. But that also shows me that the heat is not super consistent. In a wood burning machine, to me, it's really important that it is consistent. I also want to test the mid-range of the heat because that's where you're going to get the greatest number of values in shading. You want to have a fair amount of low values that give you kind of a toasty look, and you want to have a fair amount of medium values and high values. And the high values are going to, or the darker values are going to give you that darker burn. But it looks like the mid-range is fairly hard to find. So I'm going to set this down for just a second so that I can show it to you. But this tray is frustrating. I don't like that the pen and the cord are heavier and kind of push the tray around. Makes me feel like the pen is unstable. That's not good. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the burner and show you this. So here you can see at a 395, it burned lighter than a 389. These ones down here all lit everything on fire. But you can see that those two that should have been, that actually were burned with the knob turned to the same point. So if I had it right here, then these are the ones that I burned. And 802 to 765 seems like a fairly big jump to me in a difference of heat. And then when I had it on the next notch down, it was 685 and 668, which isn't so bad, but it's not the same. Now here in the middle range, the numbers are fairly close, but the burns are still different. They're still not consistent. And then down low, there was almost no burning and there was almost no mid-range. So to me, this would be very frustrating trying to control in that tiny little mid-range to be able to get the shading that I want. So with that part of the testing done, I wanted to show you how to clean the nib as well as how to change out the nib. So I don't know if you can see that, but there's some carbon buildup on there. And so what you want to do is you want to wipe that off onto this little sponge. And this sponge already is wet. You want it damp, just lightly damp. But then you just wipe it onto the sponge. You do have to hold it in place though. If you don't, see how squirrely that is? That's irritating. So you hold it in place and then it can wipe off the carbon. Now it doesn't do as well as some of the other cleaning tools I have, but some of the machines don't come with any kind of cleaning tools. And so this is kind of nice that it has a little something built in that you can use while you're burning. Just flip the machine into the off position and give it a little swipe. Now, when you are switching the nibs, you just need to use a Phillips head to loosen those screws. And typically I like to use pliers or tweezers. but this machine didn't come with any. So I'm just going to use my Phillips head screwdriver and pop it off of there. I would recommend using pliers or tweezers, but that's what I used for now. And then you take the nib that you do want to put in, you place the little prongs in there, and then tighten it back down. And you want to do this while it's off. You never switch a nib while it's on. Get those nice and snug, and you are ready to burn again. And I wanted to show you what I meant earlier about having a bent nib. So this is a shading nib. I'm just going to try to get it in the middle there where it was nice and dark but not lighting everything on fire. But you can see it really doesn't have a bend to it, and trying to place it flat against that wood is really hard because the pen is in the way. See that? So you have to lift it up more on its side in order to touch the wood. So it barely comes down. So when you have those really long nibs, it makes it really hard to do anything with it. But you can still do plenty. You can turn it upside down, get a nice sharp look to it. You can turn it flat and get a wider look to it. You can pull it towards you and get a really thick line there. So it's still usable. It's still a good machine. It might not be my favorite machine, but it definitely has its perks. I love that it can burn very high and very low because that makes it very versatile. But I don't like that it doesn't have a whole lot of medium values because that makes it less versatile in shading, and really a better machine for line art or for lettering and that kind of thing. And then I don't like that the nibs are flat instead of bent. You can bend them yourself. They're fairly small, or they're fairly thin, so that should be pretty easy. And then it does have a cleaning tool here. It's just not the best, and it doesn't remove all of the carbon. Now, this is considered the budget machine, so it's about $100 or less as of the making of this movie. It does have a nice long cord, and it does have a single port. It does have 2 pens. The pens are lightweight. I like that. I don't like how thick it is. I don't care for the cleaning tools or the tray. It does have a decent variety of nibs though, although some of them are repetitive. So overall, would I recommend this machine? Well, it's not my favorite machine, but if you are on a budget and you don't have anything over $100 to spend, then this might be an option to consider. It does have a wide range of heat. My only concern is that you would have a fight to control that mid-range heat. So really it would be great for beginners who are doing line art and lettering. And if you do want this machine, I'll have a link to it in the description below, and be watching for more burner reviews because they're coming. Later, Pyro.